The Nerdcast Empire is on the air as our music restarts again as my board is having a fit. So let's just go ahead and turn that down while we get that straightened out. Great to have you along with us, Matt, in the studio for another episode of Anime Thursdays on the Nerdcast Empire. And we are talking all things anime today. It is Anime Thursdays, which is going to move to Anime Wednesdays next week as we revamp our weekly schedule. But we are glad to be with you this morning here on the Nerdcast Empire. And joining me in studio bright and early on a Thursday morning is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. I can talk. Holy crap, I can hear myself. I was worried about that for a moment. Yeah, it's going. A lot of news to cover today. A lot of random opening videos to watch. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we're going to be talking anime news in the first segment, and then we're going to do a little React content on the Twitch page. So, of course, you're going to want to be on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire. That's where you're going to catch this. We will post a link to the videos in the chat if you want to go check those out on YouTube. But if you're on YouTube or if you're on our podcast network, you are not going to get a chance to see those videos in the archive because YouTube does not like you reacting to YouTube content for some reason. And obviously, copyright could be an issue on our podcast network. But we've got some news stories, but before we do that, let's just talk about the upcoming schedule. Things will shift just a little bit. Of course, Sunday night, we'll be back with you with another episode of Music Weekly, and we are on to 2025 on Music Weekly. This week, we're going to check out the music of January the 3rd and January the 10th. So looking forward to getting back into new music after our best of. And if you haven't checked that out, you can check that out in the archives. We had a chance to go through the best music of 2024. A lot of really good stuff. We're going to dive into 2025 coming up Sunday night, 7 o'clock Eastern time. Then next week, Monday and Friday, we'll start our daily or bi-daily or tri-daily. I don't know how you want to figure that out. But Monday and Friday will be news podcasts at 9 a.m. Eastern time. It'll be short, 15 to 20 minutes of the biggest news headlines of the morning. You'll see those live on Twitch. You'll see them on YouTube as well. And then at the end of the week, we'll put those together and upload it to the podcast network as our weekly news update. And then on Wednesday is where we will have our Anime Wednesdays, and it'll be at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time or thereabouts each and every Wednesday, where we will bring you the latest anime news and more coming up. So that is what the schedule is going to look like going forward. We'll remind you again a little bit later on. We're going to get to some news headlines first, and we're going to start off with a news story about a studio shutdown, but this is a North American studio that is shutting down. Anime studio Tonari Animation was closed after 4 years in business, and this is an interesting studio. A lot of stuff going on here. Probably the non-controversial part of this was a studio that received a lot of outsourced work over the last 4 years, including from shows like Delicious in Dungeon, My Hero Academia, Boruto, Spy Family, One Piece, Castlevania. Even did some work for one of the biggest VTubers in the English-speaking world, Gargura. But unfortunately, there were some issues with quality coming out of the studio. There were also some complaints about workers being underpaid and overworked, which of course is kind of a theme in the animation industry. And then some other kind of bigger issues later on involving getting into NFTs and some AI stuff that eventually kind of signaled their downfall. It's just an interesting story because I don't think, Mike, this is going to be the last of these type of things we hear about because, you know, outsourcing anime and animation is something that's been going on forever, but it is because there's more shows now than ever before. It's something that happens a lot in the industry now, and I think the quality of it, what you're getting out of that studio, the working conditions, all those sorts of things are probably going to lead to more of these types of studios being better known and probably not for the right reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the founder CEO that they mentioned in the story, Jarrett Martin, is moving on to Creative Freaks as a creative director. You just kind of hope, based on a lot of what we read about what this company's gone through, you really hope that this person doesn't repeat that or isn't in a position where these kind of things can continue. I mean, failed GoFundMe was mentioned in the article. Posting a job that required relocation to Tokyo that was paying well below what it would cost to live in Tokyo. Just a lot of things that you don't want to see. And I think if the industry is going to continue to expand to North America, and there's one of the other stories that we talked about involves Sony opening studios in both the Western world and the Chinese speaking world. You just want to make sure you get the right people in play and you don't run into issues like this, because that could be just terribly detrimental to the business as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, at best, you're going to run into issues of quality. Like you said, some of the AI stuff, some of the rush jobs, and again, part of the reason they're outsourcing all this stuff. And we're going to get to another story coming up in a moment about an ambitious plan for Kadokawa coming up. You just have so much of this stuff, and we've done a couple of episodes talking about, are we headed towards another anime bubble? And when you hear things like this, you just think this, doesn't necessarily mean that the bubble's going to burst, but it is kind of one of the early signs where you see a studio that was getting AAA work. I hate to use that name with anime because it doesn't mean the same. There's not the same connotation as there is in video games.
Sure.
You're talking.
Well, there should be.
Yeah, but obviously, just because the video game world,
the implied meaning is still the same.
Yeah, these are big titles, obviously, and they're getting to work on these big titles. And there was a little bit of that. Another show that I enjoyed, at least for a little while, was Wonder Egg Priority, and they ran into an issue where they were outsourcing stuff to America, and the stuff was behind. They had to delay episodes, and we've seen several series already, and there's another one currently that got the second half of their season delayed until 2025. So, these are all warning signs. Like, not any one of them in particular is concerning specifically, but when you start piling all this stuff on top, it does give you pause that, at some point there's just something's got to give, because you're going to end up with a bunch of these shows just churned out that aren't very good. Their quality's not good. If they are good, you're going to run into issues where you can't get them out on time, and then you have companies that are also not above board that are getting involved as well. It's a little scary to see what the ripple effects in the industry could be.
Yeah, it's concerning because clearly their numbers are showing that anime is more popular now in the West and in China than it's ever been. But I don't think the wise next step is, well, let's flood the market with as much of it as humanly possible because it'll all sell. I think part of the appeal of it is generally the quality of it. I think this isn't a fast food thing. This is more of a multi-star dining experience. I don't think more mediocre anime is going to be healthy for the industry.
I would think not as well, but it's going to be interesting to follow along with these types of stories and see what other studios come to the forefront in this way. And obviously we'll also probably have stories about studios appearing out of nowhere too, because when one studio disappears, somebody's got to pop up to kind of take the workload. So
yeah.
We'll see how that goes, but just something worth keeping an eye on. Anime Studio Tonari shutting down, and we'll see where that goes from here. Next story is always one we enjoy talking about, even if there aren't maybe a ton of titles that we're really jazzed about. I think the fact that this company continues to do these things is really exciting. Discotech held their I wouldn't say annual, it's every so often licensing spree announcement thing on Monday, I believe it was.
Extravaganza.
Yeah, it's kind of a multi-screen experience with their YouTube stream, and then also their X posts that kind of allow them to show some trailers maybe they can't put on YouTube. In fact, their stream got taken down once for one of the trailers they did show. But as far as titles announced, some Western stuff, some anime stuff, some live action stuff, the more Super Sentai type stuff that they're really excited about. But from an anime point of view, Urotsuki Doji was one that a lot of people were certainly interested in. It was kind of a borderline adult anime. It is a pretty dark looking show, but they basically had to go through and totally rehab this to make it releasable, as far as just cleaning up everything involved in it. Some other ones, Cyborg 009 versus Devilman, Angel Heart, another spinoff, which is another spinoff of the City manga or City Hunter manga, another Osamatsu-kun anime, containing all 86 episodes of the original Osamatsu Kun anime, and then maybe one that we're a little more familiar with, Flame of Recca, coming out. That was a show, great theme songs, kind of fitting. We're going to talk about theme songs today. Space Adventure Cobra, the movie, is going to come out with the Manga Entertainment, I believe is how they pronounced it. English dub. Another Lupin the Third live action movie is going to be coming out. Vivid Strike, which is a spinoff of Lyrical Nanoha. And then one that I really enjoyed as we continue to scroll down this article, Higurashi, When They Cry, the original series. Really, really like that. If you're into psychological horror anime, can't recommend that one enough. It's the fourth time this has been licensed and released and seems to keep doing well. Deers also, I think I watched some of that. And a handful of other things. Discotek just doing great work, saving a lot of these titles that seem to disappear into licensing limbo and putting them back out there. And it's just, they're a company that's really easy to root for. They've also announced Anime OCD as a website where you can buy their stuff. So if you're looking for an alternative to the Crunchyroll store, which we always are, that's an option. But general thoughts about what we heard from Discotek.
Yeah, I thought the stream was really informative and cool. On top of just the anime license rescues, which are cool enough, I thought, even though they aren't all things I'm interested in, the Western cartoons from like the 90s, I thought that was really wild because you don't, as someone who enjoys retro video gaming, the topic always comes up regarding game preservation, but I guess I never really considered that as much in terms of cartoons. But you look at the Western cartoon of Highlander, King Arthur and the Knights of Justice, Stone Protectors, Darkstalkers, and Street Fighter. They were talking about Stone Protectors, which doesn't interest me in the slightest, but the fact that the work they had to do just to clean up the masters, to get it in create a producible state, it's wild that and wonderful that there are people out there that actually care enough about what for most people would probably just be whatever. It's not a big deal, but these guys are out there bringing this in-house, probably getting it on the cheap if I had to guess, but they're putting in the work to keep it preserved. And, if you're a kid who grew up on those, they're always going to be available because of companies like Discotek.
Yeah, the work they're doing to rehab a lot of this stuff, and we've seen some of the shows they've released prior that have had the rehab, the refresh, where they've had to go through and in some cases reanimate stuff because it's just so dirty and dusty that you can't actually just do a simple cleanup. It takes a little bit more. And then there's, they were talking about the one show where they brought in the UK dub of it and it didn't quite match up with the, animation. So they just did a dub only release of something because it wouldn't match up with the Japanese originals. And just a ton of work.
That was Cobra, wasn't it?
It may have been Cobra,
which they also have the weird synth pop group that the British dub evidently brought in to redo the music. So it's an entirely just different kind of wild experience that they were able to get a hold of to release to people. Not necessarily an official product, but for really big fans, that's got to be kind of cool.
Yeah, it's exciting to see what these guys are doing, and there's a lot of licenses that continue to drop off, and that's why we both have a pretty extensive physical collection, and it's just you don't know what of that stuff is not going to be available. And even now, there's shows we talk about all the time that we're watching now that don't have physical releases, and it's like, are we going to have to wait 10 years, 20 years until Discotek picks them up on the cheap after they've done all their streaming work that they're going to do, and then now somebody will finally pick them up and give it a physical release?
Well, it's worrying too when you have a franchise like Macross.
Yeah.
We thought we weren't going to be able to get a hold of any kind of localized version, subtitled, dubbed in general. And, it's now going to be released via Hulu. And then you find out they're making cuts to it. To me, that's just a gross lack of appreciation for the product and the artist.
And I haven't gone through and confirmed it, which a lot of the online blame was going to Disney and Disney Plus, which is understandable. Where maybe that release in the UK wasn't censored, but then on the US version of it, they've decided to censor it. That's kind of weird and really unacceptable. If you want to license anime, if you want to get into the anime game, you're doing it uncensored. That's the way it's got to be done, or you just don't get involved in it. And Some companies have learned that lesson the hard way, and sometimes unfairly. Like 4Kids certainly got dragged through the mud for a lot of the things they did, but most of the things they did were understandable for who they were marketing the show to.
I mean, Macross, you're not releasing it so 8-year-olds can watch it,
correct.
Presumably.
Yeah.
I've been recently watching Rainbow, which if you ran it through the same kind of filter that you're doing with Macross as far as what you're taking out, you couldn't run that show.
Yeah.
Like that show is disturbing. Like it's a prison show. What did you expect? But you have to let the villains be villainous.
Yeah.
And man, are they.
Yeah, and that's just it. I mean, again, you're getting into anime. There are certain things in anime that, maybe don't fly in Western cartoons or whatever it may be. But like if you can't give it to me the way the Japanese produced it, then don't license it. Like let Netflix pick it up. Let Crunchyroll pick it up. There's no shortage of companies that I'm sure wanted the Macross licenses because they're just gold and have been just sitting there, and they know there's a rabid fan base that wants to get this stuff. And now you have to have pause and wait and see what a physical release looks like to make sure they haven't edited those as well before you spend a bunch of money buying a bunch of Macross physically. Like, it's unacceptable.
But I think that's part of the issue is the lack of understanding that ultimately releasing Macross is for the rabid fan base.
Yes.
It's not for
the casuals.
And no offense to casuals, there's nothing wrong with them, but the person who's really into Naruto or My Hero Academia isn't necessarily going to jump on Macross and think, "Yep, this is what I've been waiting for."
No.
It's just
you might get some people that are interested, but there's a bunch of people out there that have been dying to buy this, and you're going to immediately, you've got a strike against you because you have edited the streaming version. So now they're going to be cautious, and they're probably going to wait until somebody else picks it up to make sure that it's actually been released uncensored like it should be.
It puts fans in a position where you almost have to hope for a day where the Japanese companies can utilize something like AI, give it a passable subtitle track, and release it themselves.
Well, and
at least then no one else is touching it.
That day is here, basically. I mean, we're already seeing cases where we've talked about it in some of the economics of the industry where the Japanese license holders are just taking it to market themselves. And it's like, it used to be that was incredibly expensive because when you compare what one episode of, or what one Blu-ray of a show on CD Japan compared to what you were getting from Right Stuff, there was no comparison price-wise. But now, like, number one, the first thing that made that workable is that Japan and the United States are in the same region market in Blu-ray. It's not like creating a new region. You've already created something that you can immediately, if you just put subtitles on it, immediately send over to the United States.
It plays my player. We're good.
Yeah, it's already done. Like that, there's no transfer work that has to be done to make that happen. But, if you can now also make it a little bit more affordable to the Western market, why take a chance that your vision is going to be messed up somehow by some middleman? And that should be very alarming to Western companies that are making money off anime, even if it's not a ton, because they might just decide you're not really necessary in the project again.
I also think that's where there may be a mistake being made as far as the Western expansion of anime. I think at the end of the day, I don't want you partnering with another company or, in case like Sony and Katakawa.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like the idea that, in theory, Katakawa could have just found a way to slap subtitles on all their things and have their own streaming service available in the West.
Yeah.
But now that they're married to Sony, who owns Crunchyroll, Funimation, you feel like they're always going to be married to this idea of, well, we're going to do it all through Crunchyroll. It's going to be localized. It's all, you take the good with the bad, but I feel like there's a portion of this that's now starting to feel kind of like an unwanted middleman. And I don't want it to be inoperable at this point.
And then you also run into the other end of that spectrum is something, and this kind of ties us back into the discotheque story. They mentioned that there are a couple of shows, like there's a show in the Nanoha universe, I can't remember which one, that Aniplex has the license to, and they're just not letting anybody touch it. But they're not releasing it either, so it's like...
I feel like it was some sort of precursor to Vivid Strike.
Yeah, it might have... So it's like,
where does that leave me?
You're going to have this whole, and it's not the only time, but I guess Aniplex is kind of notorious for just we're just not going to do anything with it. We have this license, and it's just going to sit here. We're not going to license it out. We're not going to do anything like that. So that's the other end of the spectrum where you run into companies that just don't play ball with anybody. And that's not good for the industry either. So kudos to Discotech. Certainly, they'll have more news throughout the year, and we'll certainly be keeping an eye on what they've got planned for us going forward. Let's talk Gundam. I'll post the article to this one in the chat, but the article the headline is not necessarily as important as the trailer and as some of the other details that have come out about the new Gundam series, which has already been in theaters. It's number 1 in the box office in Japan. It's coming to the United States via G-Kids coming up at the end of February. Really excited to hopefully get a chance to go see that in the theaters. Kenshi Yonezu, who's one of the biggest artists in Japan, doing the theme for it. Perfectly fine theme. Definitely encourage you to check out the opening video. But I guess I hadn't been keeping really close tabs on the news about this show, because when you watch the trailer, familiar face at the end of that trailer that lets you know that this series is actually set in the Universal Century.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember when the first announcement came out, I feel like on the Reddit for Gundam, people were speculating that it might be tied into the Universal Century, but I didn't know there was anything set in stone. Come to find out, it is. It's set in an alternate version of the Universal Century where Zeon, the antagonist group in the original Mobile Suit Gundam, wins the 1-year war. Apparently, Char is the one who steals the Gundam as opposed to Amuro kind of stumbling into it and piloting it. So it changes the course of history as far as how the war goes. And this anime is set 5 years after. So I'm kind of curious and I haven't read anything as far as what happened in the movie that's already premiered. I feel like there are probably spoilers all over the place if I actually looked for them. But yeah, I have to wonder what characters you're going to see make an appearance, who survived the 1-year war that played out differently. I mean, there are any number of characters that may not have lived this time around, and I'm curious to find out who. I have to wonder if this is going to end up being like the bad 1985 and Back to the Future 2. Like, is that the story you're setting up? And, when you have the creative team behind something like Evangelion, they can certainly paint a bleak picture. So maybe that's where we're heading.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was wondering, that, Evangelion, not exactly always the brightest, sunniest story. So you just wonder, like, is this going to be that dark timeline? And who's going to be the hero that's going to basically save people from that timeline? Because that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I was going to post the picture on our chat, on our window of the Gundam from the series. You posted you can buy the 1/144th size Gundam for $21.99 on the Gundam store. That's a pre-order, going to arrive sometime in the first quarter, but it's definitely again, what happens if you combine Gundam with Evangelion?
Yeah.
I feel like you get this, but at the same time, it's a pretty cool looking Gundam. I think people are really going to dig it.
Yeah, I definitely think it's awesome looking, and I love how they always have like the high grade, the less expensive model kits. I mean, this one you can buy online for like $22. That's fantastic. I did also see where the Crunchyroll store is selling a metal action figure of the G-Quux.
A name is still going to be cumbersome.
And it's the regular price for that is $234. It doesn't appear to be a model kit as much as just a fully formed figure. But,
okay.
Yeah, it looks pretty intense. I'll be anxious to see, and maybe it's out there and I just haven't found it, whatever kind of like real grade or master grade ridiculous kit that they're going to come out with. Because there's bound to be something, but yeah, I definitely think it's a cool design and can't wait to see it in action.
So numbers on the re-edited episode version of this movie began January 17th in Japan, ranked number 1 in the box office with 598 million yen, which is about $3.85 million US dollars on 352,000 admissions. So it's, as expected, it's widely popular in Japan. They've announced insert songs, includes one of the biggest VTubers in Japan, Suisei Hoshimachi, doing an insert song for that. But obviously Kenshi Yonezu I think is it no melon, no lemon, no lemon, no melon? I always get those backwards. One of the they're also doing a song for it.
I want to say no melon, no lemon. I know they do the ending theme to Where I Am presently and in the new Kenshin, and it's a great song, but yeah, getting that name correct is a challenge.
And they're involved as well, so obviously this has a huge budget and there are huge names involved. And I think because of what the story is looking like, there are going to be huge expectations as well. And I'm excited to see if this series can meet those expectations and really become an all-time classic. But we'll obviously be talking more about Gundam. We get a chance to see this in theaters, we will definitely give you a full report. The last story I picked just because it kind of ties into the first story when we're talking about studios being shut down. News came out that Kadokawa is, thanks to the investment by Sony, is going to expand their publishing output, which includes manga, light novels, other published works, to release 9,000 titles annually by fiscal year 2027, which is only a 1.5 times increase, which is kind of surprising. They're going to increase their editorial staff and all of that. The acquisition from Sony was a 10% stake in Kadokawa for approximately 50 billion yen, which is about $320 million US dollars. They're going to be setting up, as Mike mentioned earlier, production and sales bases in the US and in China to try to kind of expand upon this. 9,000 titles is a lot of titles, and my one thought is, if you think we're done with the isekai shows, we're not, because
there's so many places you can still go.
There's so many places you can still go, and if you're doing 9,000 a year, probably 4,000 of them are going to be isekai shows. But you also wonder, like, if you're an anime studio and you're looking at these 9,000 titles, how do you even begin to try to find the handful of ones that are going to be hits? Because we just did the story last week talking about how they're talking about, well, we just need to do reboots and new seasons and stuff like that, because and then you see there's 9,000 titles to pick from if you are choosing something new.
Yeah, there are only so many ways you can reboot and continue on your existing properties. The article does mention that they want to increase their focus on overseas originated IPs, which I think could be terrible.
Potentially.
Again, like, people are into manga and anime because it's not created here.
Yeah.
It's not made by Westerners. I think that's always kind of been the main selling point, is that it's Japanese. That's what people like. You extend that out to Korea. That's what people like. I think there's a certain sensibility that you're not going to have with creators in the West, and I'll be anxious to see how it pans out. But I think for a lot of fans, the second you see something and you know that it's not from Japan, you know that it was made by somebody in New York, you're just kind of like, that's not really for me. We'll see.
This makes me think of the New York City, the paste pecani sauce, salsa. Like, you want that made in Texas or wherever they made it.
It's not authentic.
You don't want it made in New York City. Like, it's interesting, and I think what will be interesting to me is the in between, because we've talked about, obviously, U.S. based, maybe not always great. Korea still probably okay. I mean, to be completely honest, there are a lot of Chinese shows that have found success in that market. What'll be interesting to me is, when they talk overseas, are they talking Europe? Are they talking like India? Because obviously that's a huge market. Everybody's trying to find ways to get into India one way or another.
Everything is overseas from Japan.
Correct. That's just it. So you just wonder, like, obviously the U.S. would be a big emphasis, but you wonder, like, where else they could be looking. Because again, when you're talking 9,000 titles, you're taking ideas from everywhere, because that's a lot of titles to try to fill. So interesting to see what they're looking at, and what does this mean too? Because that's the other thing. When they're going to say, we're going to publish your title, does that mean you get one volume, and if it sucks, then we're just not going to, you're done? Like, or how? Because that 9,000 doesn't mean we're going to get 9,020 volume shows.
You're not going to throw just guaranteed money at unproven creators, I wouldn't think.
I would think not. So, I mean, I could see a case where you would have a bunch of one-off volumes and they just put them out for sale, and then they see do any of these draw some interest? And if not, well, we'll just move on to the next one and we'll build that number up.
I assume to some degree it's like the streaming platform model, where it's like, if we can bring in as many things in-house that we have to do as little work on as possible, let's do it. So you're going to find these IPs that, these people are maybe doing a lot of the work on their own and saying, hey, we'll essentially host you, we'll publish you, not a whole lot of skin off our back. And if it sells, it sells, and we'll go from there.
The other thing you wonder too is, what about, Western creations from Japanese people who happen to be living in the West that maybe have gotten out of the industry because they're not in Japan anymore. So it's just kind of, people that live in New York, LA, these, places where there are very large Asian populations. We could also see some of them possibly get involved and get back into creation. So, it's going to be a very fascinating time. And again, what does that do for the market? Because we talked about the story a few months ago, the art of the video that NHK World did talking about creating AI translations of manga, where you're able to almost translate it across multiple languages in a matter of minutes instead of, a long process. I have to assume that's the other side to this, is that you have to be able to quickly translate this stuff from language to language. And,
I don't think these companies are in a position where they want to dump a whole bunch of money into unproven markets to see if they can get a foothold. I think, if they can do it as cost effectively as possible, then it makes sense.
Yeah. So all these stories that we've done kind of all tie together. So we'll certainly keep an eye on all of that going through 2025. We're going to get to some React content on the Twitch channel. So if you are watching us on YouTube or you are listening to us on your favorite podcast network, we're about to go to the end of this episode. We do appreciate you joining us, and we'll wrap up where you can join us next in a few minutes. But of course, just a good reminder, join us on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire. Anytime we do music content, that's the one place you can guarantee you're going to get to hear it, especially live. We're going to be live probably like 4 or 5 days a week now. So join us live, join us on the VODs there. But that's the place to be. But we appreciate wherever you're listening. But if you're on one of those other sources, you're about to cut to the end of this program. So we encourage you to check us out on Twitch to be able to see what we're going to talk about next. So we're going to welcome back in our YouTube watchers and our podcasters. We have gone through Daytona 520's list of the best themes of each season in 1996. Again, check out the VOD on Twitch, or just go to Daytona 520's page, his seasonal anime page, and check out the songs yourself. And
if you want to kill time just watching anime theme lists, his channel has a multitude of them.
For sure. It's a great way to check it out. And we'll probably do this again sometime later on the podcast. But that is going to wrap things up. If my button works this time, we'll see if it plays the song all the way through without cutting out like it did last time. But thanks to everybody for joining us. Chris and Rachel in the chat, Mike in person as always, and to you, wherever you've listened to this, we really do appreciate it. A reminder, we'll be back Sunday, Music Sunday, Music Weekly. We'll be coming up the music of January the 3rd and January the 10th as we get into 2025. We'll be with you. We'll be back in the vault as well on Sunday. And then starting Monday, we'll have our news podcast on Monday and Friday, about 20 minutes or so, 9 o'clock Eastern time in the morning, Monday and Friday, and then anime will move to Wednesdays. That'll be at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time next Wednesday. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast, and a big thanks to you, the listener, wherever you're listening to our podcast. That's going to wrap things up for Mike and the entire group. I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.